It was a chilly afternoon in a small American town, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower and the hum of old engines echoed down quiet streets. Inside a retro-style diner, the smell of coffee, sizzling bacon and fried grease filled the air, mixing with the soft hum of a jukebox playing old classics. Sunlight streamed through the turquoise-painted windows, casting a warm glow over red and teal booths. Customers chatted lazily, clinking cups and plates, until a moment arrived that would stop every sound, every whisper, and turn an ordinary day into something unforgettable. In a corner booth sat Reed Dawson, a middle-aged biker known in his circle as Red Dog. He looked like life had carved him from stone, with tattoos running down his arms, a gold cross resting over his chest, and a worn denim vest frayed at the edges. His hands were calloused, more accustomed to gripping motorcycle handles than handshakes. To strangers, he seemed intimidating, a man who had lived rough, broken rules, maybe even a few hearts. Yet behind his hard eyes was something quieter, something tired. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, staring out the window, unaware that fate was about to sit down at his table in the most unexpected form. If you believe kindness can still exist in unexpected places, if you believe second chances can come from the most unlikely people, pause this video, like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps keep real stories of humanity alive. The bell above the diner door jingled softly, and she came in, or perhaps stumbled. A thin woman, late 20s, wearing a grey sweater that hung loose over her frail frame. Her jeans were torn, her shoes mismatched. In her arms, she held a little girl, no older than 3. The child's hair was tangled, her cheeks pale from the cold. The mother's eyes scanned the diner quickly, not for a seat, not for a menu, but for a sign of mercy. The waitress behind the counter gave a cautious glance but did not move. Other customers turned their heads briefly, then went back to their meals. Only Reed noticed the woman's trembling hands, the way she whispered softly to keep her daughter calm. She walked slowly toward his booth, each step weighed down with fear and hesitation. Then, instead of asking to sit, she lowered herself to her knees beside him. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Can I take the leftovers? For my daughter." The diner fell silent. Even the jukebox seemed to pause. Reed stared at her, speechless. The little girl pressed her face into her mother's chest, clutching the thin fabric of the sweater as though it were her only shield. The woman's eyes were red, not just from hunger, but from the humiliation of asking. Reed looked down at his plate, then back at her. Something shifted inside him, guilt, compassion, maybe both. He had been many things in life, a fighter, a wanderer, a man running from mistakes that had once defined him. And now, seeing this woman kneeling before him, he was reminded of a past he had tried to bury, a wife he had lost, a little daughter he hadn't seen since she was 5. He didn't even know where she was now. Every night when the engines went quiet, he imagined her face, wondering if she ever missed him. Without a word, Reed stood. The woman's eyes widened, expecting anger. Instead, he gently pushed his plate toward her and walked to the counter. The cook nodded, understanding immediately. Moments later, Reed returned with 2 takeout boxes filled with warm food and a bottle of milk. He knelt beside the woman, lowering himself to her level. A rough, tattooed biker on his knees, face to face with a mother and her child. "This isn't leftovers," he said softly. His voice was steady but full of emotion. "This is fresh, and there's more for tomorrow." He handed her the boxes, then pulled out a small folded bill from his vest pocket, enough to cover a week of meals. The woman's lips trembled. She looked down at the food, then up at him, tears spilling over her cheeks. Why would you help me?" she whispered. Reed glanced at the little girl, nestled safely against her mother, and said quietly, "Because once I couldn't help mine." For a long moment, silence reigned. The diner watched as the woman clutched the food and money to her chest, whispering thanks that trembled with gratitude. Even the bikers a few booths away looked away, some swallowing hard, others pretending not to wipe their eyes. The waitress, finally moved, brought a warm cup of cocoa to the little girl. Reed sat back slowly, his heart heavy yet lighter than it had been in years. He watched the woman leave, her daughter in her arms, eyes brighter than when they arrived. The diner's gentle hum returned, dishes clinking, voices murmuring. But something had changed. Kindness had filled the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Outside, Reed's reflection appeared faint in the window, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. Not the tough biker smirk, but a quiet, genuine smile of a man who had just found a piece of himself again. That night, as he rode his motorcycle home under the fading light, Reed felt something warm in his chest. Hope, forgiveness, somewhere out there. He hoped his daughter was safe, maybe even cared for by someone kind, someone who believed that a single act of compassion could change everything. And that is exactly what happened in that diner. A woman with nothing reminded everyone present of humanity, and a man who thought he had nothing left to give rediscovered the part of his soul he thought was gone. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Sometimes one simple act of compassion is enough to change a life forever. As neon lights flickered outside the diner that evening, no one forgot what they had witnessed. A single question, a single plate of food, and a silence louder than any words could ever be. That night, Reed rode through the quiet streets of the small town, the wind whipping past his face. The hum of his motorcycle filled the air, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying every detail of the afternoon. The woman's pleading eyes, the little girl's pale cheeks, the trembling hands that held the food. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known he'd lost. The next morning, Reed found himself back at the diner, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the early daylight. He ordered his usual coffee but barely touched it, eyes scanning the door every few seconds. He wanted to know if they were okay, if the woman and child had made it home safely. Hours passed, the morning crowd came and went, but there was no sign of them. Reed felt a twinge of worry. He realized he cared far more than he had anticipated. Then, as the lunch rush began, the bell above the door jingled again. The woman entered, the little girl clutching her hand tightly, her faded pink coat slightly brighter in the sunlight. Their eyes met Reed's, and he saw a spark of recognition and gratitude. She approached cautiously, as if unsure if he would speak or look away. I didn't know how to thank you," she said softly, her voice cracking. "We had no food yesterday. My little girl, she hasn't eaten properly in days." Her eyes filled with tears again. Reed shook his head. "No need for thanks," he said, his voice low but firm. "Just make sure you're both okay. That's enough." But something in her expression made him pause. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. I want to pay you back somehow," she whispered. Reed took the paper and unfolded it carefully. Inside was a simple drawing of a motorcycle and a tiny stick figure family holding hands. The little girl had drawn it. Reed chuckled quietly, a deep, warm sound that startled even himself. This is payment enough," he said, folding the drawing and tucking it into his vest pocket. Days turned into weeks, and Reed found himself looking forward to moments at the diner. Not just for the coffee or the food, but for the quiet hope that someone might need help, that he could do something good in a world that often felt harsh. He had started leaving extra food in a small bag behind the counter, which the waitress handed discreetly to the woman when she came by. The child grew stronger, healthier, her pale cheeks turning rosy under the care of her mother and, now indirectly, Reed. One evening, as the diner's lights flickered on, Reed noticed something unusual, a small bouquet of wildflowers sitting on his booth. A note was tucked between the petals, "For the man who taught us kindness matters." From someone who was once lost, now found. He smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that went beyond gratitude. It was a quiet reminder that even the smallest gestures could ripple into something bigger than he had imagined. That night, riding his motorcycle under the fading sky, Reed realized he was no longer alone in carrying the weight of the world. The memory of his own daughter